Okay. Well, today we in a bit of conundrum because there's two very long footnotes here, and I don't know how one is supposed to read this paragraph without getting totally sidebarred and distracted by these footnotes. So I think what I'll do is read the paragraph here, and then, which is very short, and then go back and take the footnotes sequentially. So here we have, Johnson one day gave high rise to Dr. Bentley's verses in Dodsley's collection, which he recited with his usual energy. Dr. Adam Smith, who was present, observed in his decisive professorial manner, "Very well, very well." Johnson, however, added, "Yes, they are very well, sir, but you may observe in what manner they are well. They are the forcible verses of a man of a strong mind, but not accustomed to write verse, for there is some uncouthness in the expression." So that was it, and now we have two very long footnotes to go along with that. The first one is about Johnson's high praise for Dr. Bentley's verses. It says, Dr. Johnson, in his Life of Cowley, says that these are the only English verses which Bentley is known to have written. I shall here insert them and hope my readers will apply them. Now I will have to read some probably terrible rhyming poetry. Here we go. Who strives to mount Parnassus's hill, and thence poetic laurels bring, must first acquire due force and skill, must fly with swan's or eagle's wing. Who nature's treasures would explore, her mysteries in arena know, must high as lofty Newton soar, must stoop as delving woodward low. Who studies ancient laws and rites, tongues, arts, and arms, and history, must drudge like Selden, days and nights, and in the endless labors die. I guess history rhymes with die. History, die. History, D? I don't know. Who travels in religious jars, Jars, I don't know what that means. Truth mixed with error, shades with rays, that's in parentheses. Like Whiston, wanting picks or stars, in ocean wide, or sinks or strays. That's pretty terrible, but okay. But great our hero's hope, long toil, and comprehensive genius crown, all science, all arts his spoil, yet what reward or what renown? I made a weird noise there. Yet what reward or what renown? Just rolls off the tongue. Envy innate in vulgar souls, envy steps in and stops his rise. Envy with poison tarnish fouls, his luster and his worth descries. He lives inglorious or in want, to college and old books confined. Instead of learned, he's called pendant. Dunces advanced, he's left behind. Yet left content, a genuine stoic he, great without patron, rich without South Sea. So basically, I am a rock, I am an island. It's Simon and Garfunkel. And now the other footnote is after that whole paragraph when Johnson said, "For there is some uncouthness in his expression." The difference between Johnson and Smith is apparent even in this slight instance. Smith was a man of extraordinary application and had his mind crowded with all manner of subjects, but the force, acuteness, and vivacity of Johnson was not to be found there. He had bookmaking so much in his thoughts and was so chary, Chary, he was so chary of what might be turned to account in that way that he once said to Sir Joshua Reynolds that he made it a rule when in company never to talk of what he understood. Beauclerk had for a short time a pretty high opinion of Smith's conversation, Garrick, after listening to him for a while, as to one of whom his expectations had been raised, returned slyly to a friend, perhaps Beauclerk himself, and whispered to him, "What say you to this? Eh? Flabby, I think." All right. Now we can move on. Although I must warn you, there is another rather long footnote coming up on this very next page. Drinking tea one day at Garrick's with Mr. Langton, Johnson was questioned if he was not somewhat of a heretic as to Shakespeare. Said Garrick, "I doubt he is a little of an infidel." "Sir," said Johnson, "I will stand by the lines I have written on Shakespeare in my prologue at the opening of your theater." Mr. Langton suggested that in the line, "And painting time toiled after him in vain," Johnson might have had in his eye the passage in The Tempest, where Prospero says of Miranda, "She will outstrip all praise and make it halt behind her." Johnson said nothing. Garrick then ventured to observe, "I do not think that the happiest line in the praise of Shakespeare." Johnson exclaimed, smiling, "Prosaical rogues! Next time I write, I'll make both time and space pants." Okay, and here's this footnote now. "I am sorry to see in the Transactions of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, Volume 2, an essay on the character of Hamlet, written, I should suppose, by a very young man, though called Reverend." It says here it's the Reverend Thomas Robertson in a footnote, "who speaks with presumptuous petulance of the first literary character of his age, amidst a cloudy confusion of words, which hath of late too often passed in Scotland for metaphysics. He thus ventures to criticize one of the noblest lines in our language. Dr. Johnson has remarked that time toiled after him in vain, but I should apprehend that this is entirely to mistake the character. Time toils after every great man, as well as after Shakespeare. The workings of an ordinary mind keep pace, indeed, with time. They move no faster. They have their beginning, their middle, and their end. But superior nature can reduce these into a point. They do not, indeed, suppress them, but they suspend, or they lock them up in the breast. The learned society, under whose sanction such gabble is ushered into the world, would do well to offer a premium to anyone who will discover its meaning." I think I understand Boswell with the Reverend saying. He's saying that Shakespeare controlled time, I guess, or people that can do with time what they want. Although I'm not clear what that has to do with the original passage. So you get a point there. Okay. I'm not going to dwell on that too much. "It is well known that there was formerly a rude custom for those who were sailing upon the Thames to accost each other as they passed, in the most abusive language they could invent. Generally, however, with as much satirical humor as they were capable of producing. Addison gives a specimen of this ribaldry in numbered 383 of The Spectator, when Sir Roger de Coverley and he are going to Spring Garden. Johnson was once eminently successful in this species of contest. A fellow having attacked him with such coarse raillery, Johnson answered him thus." Oh, I remember this. This is old hat. We've heard this before. "Sir, your wife, under pretense of keeping a bawdy house, is a receiver of stolen goods." One evening, when he and Mr. Burke and Mr. Langton were in company together, and the admirable scolding of Timon of Athens was mentioned, this instance of Johnson's was quoted and thought to have at least equal excellence. "Sir, your wife, under pretense of keeping a bawdy house, is a receiver of stolen goods." The ultimate, ultimate insult. As Johnson always allowed the extraordinary talents of Mr. Burke, so Mr. Burke was fully sensible of the wonderful powers of Johnson. Mr. Langton recollects having passed an evening with both of them when Mr. Burke repeatedly entered upon topics which it was evident he would have illustrated with extensive knowledge and richness of expression, but Johnson always seized upon the conversation, in which, however, he acquitted himself in a most masterly manner. As Mr. Burke and Mr. Langton were walking home, Mr. Burke observed that Johnson had been very great that night. Mr. Langton joined in this, but added he could have wished to hear more from another person, plainly intimating that he meant Mr. Burke. "Oh, no," said Mr. Burke. "It is enough for me to have rung the bell to him." Beauclerk, having observed to him of one of their friends that he was awkward at counting money. "Why, sir," said Johnson, "I am likewise awkward at counting money. But then, sir, the reason is plain. I have had very little money to count." He had an abhorrence of affectation. Talking of old Mr. Langton, of whom he said, "Sir, you will seldom see such a gentleman, such as are his stories of literature, such his knowledge of divinity, and such his exemplary life." He added, "And, sir, he has no grimace, no gesticulation, no burst of admiration or on trivial occasions. He never embraces you with an overacted cordiality." Being in company with a gentleman who thought fit to maintain Dr. Berkeley's ingenious philosophy that nothing exists but as perceived by some mind, that's Dr. Berkeley, philosophy of some mind. When the gentleman was going away, Johnson said to him, "Pray, sir, don't leave us, for we may perhaps forget to think of you, and then you will cease to exist." Oh, that's good. Goldsmith, upon being visited by Johnson one day in the Temple, said to him with a little jealousy of the appearance of his accommodation, "I shall soon be in better chambers than these." Johnson at the same time checked him and paid him a handsome compliment, implying that a man of his talent should be above attention to such distinctions. "Nay, sir, never mind that. Nil te quis veris extra. Seek not thyself without thyself to find," from Persius. The satires. At the time when his pension was granted to him, Johnson said with a noble literary ambition, "Had this happened 20 years ago, I should have gone to Constantinople to learn Arabic, as Pocock did." As an instance of the niceties of his taste, though he praised West's translation of Pindar, he pointed out the following passage as faulty by expressing a circumstance so minute as to detract from the general dignity which should prevail. "Down then from thy glittering nail, take, O Muse, the Dorian lyre." Okay. When Mr. Vesey was proposed as a member of the literary club, Mr. Burke began by saying that he was a man of gentle manners. "Sir," said Johnson, "you need say no more. When you have said a man of gentle manners, you have said enough." The late Mr. Fitzherbert told Mr. Langton that Johnson said to him, "Sir, a man has no more right to say an uncivil thing than to act one. No more right to say a rude thing to another than to knock him down." I feel like I've heard this anecdote before too, but okay. "My dear friend, Dr. Bathurst," said he with a warmth of approbation. I think this is Johnson here. Declared he was glad that his father, who was a West Indian planter, had left his affairs in total ruin, because, having no estate, he was not under the temptation of having slaves. Yep. Richardson had little conversation except about his own works, of which Sir Joshua Reynolds said he was always willing to talk, and glad to have them introduced. Johnson, when he carried Mr. Langton to see him, professed that he could bring him out into conversation, and used his elusive expression, "Sir, I can make him rear." But he failed, For in that interview, Richardson said little else than that there lay in the room a translation of his Clarissa into German. Footnote here from Boswell. A literary lady has favored me with a characteristic anecdote of Richardson. One day at his country house at Northend, where a large company was assembled at dinner, a gentleman who was just returned from Paris, willing to please Mr. Richardson, mentioned to him a very flattering circumstance, that he had seen his Clarissa lying on the king's brother's table. Richardson, observing that part of the company were engaged in talking to each other, affected then not to attend to it. But by and by, when there was a general silence, and he thought that the flattery might be fully heard, he addressed himself to the gentleman. I think, sir, you were saying something about, pausing in a high flutter of expectation. The gentleman, provoked at this is an inordinate vanity, resolved not to indulge it, and with an inquisitive, sly air of indifference answered, "Oh, a mere trifle, sir, not worth repeating." The mortification of Richardson was visible, and he did not speak 10 words more the whole day. Dr. Johnson was present and appeared to enjoy it much. Once, when somebody produced a newspaper in which there was a letter of stupid abuse of Sir Joshua Reynolds, of which Johnson himself came in for a share, "Pray," said Johnson, "let us have it read aloud from beginning to end." Which being done, he, with a ludicrous earnestness, and not directing his look to any particular person, called out, "Are we alive after all this satire?" He had a strong prejudice against the political character of Secker, S-E-C-K-E-R, one instance of which appeared at Oxford, where he expressed great dissatisfaction at his varying the old established toast, "Church and King." "The Archbishop of Canterbury," said he, with an affected, smooth, smiling grimace, "drinks Constitution and Church and State." Being asked what difference there was between the two toasts, he said, "Why, sir, you may be sure he meant something." Yet, when the life of that prelate, prefixed to his sermons by Dr. Porteous and Dr. Stinton, his chaplains, first came out, he read it with the utmost avidity and said, "It is a life well written, and that well deserves to be recorded." Of a certain noble lord, says here John Boyle, 5th Earl of Cork in Orrery, Johnson said, "Respect him you could not, for he had no mind of his own. Love him you could not, for that which you could do with him everyone else could." Of Dr. Goldsmith, Johnson said, "No man was more foolish when he had not a pen in his hand, or more wise when he had." He told in his lively manner the following literary anecdote. Green and Guthrie, an Irishman and a Scotchman, were walking into a bar. Undertook a translation of Duhal's History of China. Green said of Guthrie that he knew no English, and Guthrie of Green that he knew no French. And these two undertook to translate Duhal's History of China. In this translation there was found the 26th day of the new moon. Now, as the whole age of the moon is but 28 days, the moon, instead of being new, was nearly as old as it could be. Their blunder arose from their mistaking the word neuvième, ninth, for nouvelle, or nueve, new. Talking of Dr. Blagden's copiousness and precision of communication, Dr. Johnson said, "Blagden, sir, is a delightful fellow." On occasion of Dr. Johnson's publishing his pamphlet of the false alarm, there came out a very angry answer. This is a letter to Samuel Jansen, LLD, 1770, by John Wilkes. And it says here by many, supposed to be by Mr. Wilkes, but apparently afterwards it's been confirmed it is by him. Dr. Johnson determined on not answering it, but in conversation with Mr. Langton mentioned a particular or two, which if he had replied to it, he might perhaps have inserted. In the answers pamphlet, it had been said with solemnity, "Do you consider, sir, that a House of Commons is to the people as a creature is to its creator?" To this question, said Dr. Johnson, I could have replied that, in the first place, the idea of a creator must be such as that he has a power to make or annihilate his creature. Then it cannot be conceived that a creature can make laws for its creator. There's a footnote here from Boswell. His profound admiration of the great first cause was such as to set him above the philosophy and vain deceit, to quote Colossianus, with which men of narrower conceptions had been infected. I have heard him strongly maintain that what is right is not so from any natural fitness, but because God wills it to be right. And it is certainly so because he has disposed the relations of things so as that which he wills must be right. All right, that's enough for today. Well, until next time, bye from Boswell.